Do we have any new faces today? I feel like everyone's been here before. So moving on to status updates. Does anyone want to give status updates about work in the BAT team components? Has any progress been made on libcnb this last 2 weeks?
I submitted a couple PRs and Sam merged them for the V2 branch. They were some cleanup, so I removed some deprecated things around service bindings. There was stuff in there for the old extension build pack spec, and it seemed like a reasonable time to pull that out and just support the Kubernetes service binding spec going forward.
I did have some questions about that because we had approved like an RFC to deprecate that spec, but no one really followed through on the next steps there. So I feel like before we pull support from libcnb, we should, sort of check and I don't know exactly how we would do this, but because but like how widely is it being used in the ecosystem right now, and what would the impact be?
Yeah, it seems reasonable to maybe dot that I, and follow through on that part, because I mean, from an API standpoint, this is our only chance to remove it until V3, which hopefully is a long way off. So, it'd be nice to kind of clean that out if we can. If you have a thread or an issue or something you can point me to, I can try to follow up on that and see if maybe we can push that across the finish line before we cut a V2 for libcnb.
I mention it because I think I'm aware of some areas where it's still being used at the moment.
Okay.
And as much as I'd like to say, like, it's been deprecated for a while, let's rip it out. I'm not sure we ever did anything with the spec to indicate that it was deprecated. So then I'd put this in a bit of an awkward position if we want to remove it.
Okay. Yeah, we could certainly roll that back too. I was just trying to clean out as much as possible. Give us a fresher API.
I agree with the sentiment.
I think I just like deleting code. What can I say? I think there's possibly some more work to be done in the bindings area anyway, because I know Sam's not here, but he had mentioned this before, that he's not all that fond of the way that the things are structured there. There's kind of a like load bindings for detect and load bindings for build that are like very similar. And so that might be something to look at a little bit too, and see if we can maybe just provide a single, method call that handles both or something, just to smooth things out there a little.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I'm trying to think of what the other thing that I submitted a PR was for. I can't remember now. Source bomb. So there were a handful of changes that had been made on the main branch that didn't get ported over to V2. So I went through and moved the ones that made sense into the V2 branch as well. So I think it ended up not being a whole lot of change, because like some of the stuff that we added to main was around support for the label-based bombs and the layer-based bombs, and in V2 we only have the layer-based bombs anyway, so it was just less to move over. In regards to that, I think Sam had asked me, and I punted on it, so it might be a good discussion topic here, what people feel about in terms of the build pack APIs that we need to support or target for V2. Like right now, it's just doing the same thing as main, so it's like 5, 6, and 7, which isn't like a ton of burden to do that. So I could see us just leaving it, because why not? But again, we could possibly delete and clean up some stuff if we wanted to target 7+ only. So I'd be curious to see what people think about that. if you have strong opinions or build packs that are on a slightly older API for some reason, definitely let us know.
I guess it depends on how fast we would want people to move over from V1 to V2. Will probably affect how much we want to support in V2.
I kind of feel like we should at least support two
Us
versions
too.
because it kind of forces us to evaluate how we're going to handle multiple versions. Because I feel like going forward, we're going to have to handle that. And so if we force ourselves to do that now, maybe we can make some API changes to make that easier. Because like right now, we just kind of hack in like some if blocks here and there to handle the situations. But like I've seen stuff in like the lifecycle and pack where they have some more ergonomic APIs for handling, multiple versions. So we might need to look at like adding something like that to make that easier.
Yeah, I mean, you could, for last two, you could potentially do 0.7 and 0.8, right? As well, if you want to just go forward.
Yeah, that's true.
Even though 0.8 is not quite out yet.
Yeah, that would be another option. I don't have a strong preference. So yeah, if anyone does, let us know.
Do we know what, like, I know, does Google still uses libcnb, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what API version their build packs are on?
Yeah, we could look it up pretty quickly. 1 second. Looking at a random sample from the repo 05.
Interesting.
Once we cut V2, are we planning to still support that patches or things like that on V1 if that stuff comes up? Like, are we planning at all to move to multiple version lines of libcnb? Or I guess we could cross that bridge if we get there. It's not like we often get requests to patch things in libcnb.
That was my thought. I feel like we need to provide some sort of continuity plan, but exactly how long we do that for, I think is up in the air. May partially depend on who wants to step up and help backport things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I know, like, for Paketo Java stuff, there's like 40 build packs, so it's going to take a while to convert. So we're going to need some time for that. But that's it for the V2 stuff, and I don't think anything was pushed into main this period except for like updates, dependency updates.
Okay. I think that gives us status updates. Moving on to RFCs. There's not a ton here that's not in draft. I don't know if it's because we haven't updated all the labels, but I think there's the run image SBOM is still here to discuss. Are there RFCs in flight that the group wants to talk about today?
The utility build pack probably should be labeled. That's relevant for this group.
By the utility build pack, do you mean the dot profile build?
Yeah, the dot profile one.
Yeah, let me do that real fast. Do you want to talk about this one today, Mikey?
Yeah, that'd be nice. So I think it's feeling more solid. Thank you for the feedback. Everybody who's taking a peek at it. The one thing I wanted to put in front of this group was that I actually put a link in the agenda to a repository where I've just been capturing some thoughts and starting to just lay out some of the plumbing that we might use for the utility build packs, just so we can get some, basically to start the discussion around, what is our tooling going to look like? What is the release process going to look like, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where I wanted to put in front of this group today. If there's more to talk about on the RFC, happy to discuss that as well.
Yeah, why don't I stop sharing and hand over to you, and then we can talk about the plumbing.
Sure. Let me. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, I hope it's nothing too groundbreaking or exciting here, but just looked across the other projects in CNB and pulled out a lot of the common components. Make is pretty commonly used. Write it and go. We can use libcnb, use spec for the testing framework, that kind of thing. I did, Daniel pointed me at the pipeline builder for CI/CD, which seems like it'll give us a lot. libcnb uses that as well. And it looks like a really nice tool for, generating all the workflows and dependencies and release management and all those kinds of things. So certainly would make sense to me, especially since we're using it in another project, to use that same tooling. But yeah, I just want to kind of open this up. I don't know, if others have thoughts, or if there's anything here that's people want to dive into or talk about a little more, or anything like that, or things that should be added to, like I don't have a lot of integration testing, framework here, but that's something that, could look into. But yeah, just looking for thoughts, feedback on if once that RFC goes through, if we're going to start implementing this, what might it look like?
One thing you might add in libcnb, I believe we have some linting for the Go code that it does. It'd be nice to have that too, just for, like standard code quality.
For libcnb for the library, are we targeting V1 or V2 for implementation of the code?
It's a good question.
Like, do we want to use this as a test bed to test out libcnb V2 in practice?
I feel like it depends on our appetite for things breaking. Like V2 could still change the way things are shaped dramatically. If we started with that, might have to deal with a little bit more, API changes or something.
To me, the answer just feels like whether it's which gets released first, libcnb V2 or the first utility build pack, right? It's like we should use the newest release version of libcnb.
I also wouldn't mind if we targeted the present version of libcnb with the thought of using this as a way to generate a migration guide for V1 to V2. This would give us an example of like, here's a V1 build pack, and then here's what we had to change.
I feel like one interesting question that always comes up in build pack development, assuming we're gonna have multiples of these build packs. And maybe it's answered by our tooling and what it already supports, but it's to mono repo or not to mono repo, right? Where I feel like there's good prior art on both sides with the Google build packs in a mono repo and Paketo build packs and many tiny repos. I think the reason I'm mono repo curious is because we were talking about how we could do hacks to sort of reduce the size of builder images by reducing the number of binaries that are in build packs. Like, could you fake them all out to just be symlinks that all point to the same binary? I think you could do that for the set of utility build packs and then come up with some clever packaging. Like, we could use this as a trial ground for some of those things, but it would need to be mono repoed.
Yeah, I think I remember that discussion from somewhere where there's, and then they would need to all come together, right, in the builder, because there would be links between them and everything.
And maybe we don't need to. I'm just like throwing it out there. My instinct is that we don't want to do that, especially right off the bat, because our tooling doesn't handle it, and there's only going to be one of these. So, but just seeding some ideas for later.
Cool. All right. If folks have other thoughts or things we should think about, give me a holler either on this repo or in Slack or whatever, and we can continue the discussion. Anybody have anything on the RFC? I guess I'll hand it back over if we want to get back to the RFC list.
I think we're done with the RFC list. Should we move on to libcnb v2 logging?
Sure. I I threw that in there because I was kind of playing around with the way that logging works in V2, and I wanted to get some feedback on it. I'm just going to share real quick. So right now in the code, we have a log package with a logger implementation just called logger. Basically just has debug and info, and then several handy methods like info f, debug f, etc. When I went through the code and looked, the libcnb is only using debug with like one exception, and that is to write warning messages. So occasionally if something changes with the spec or between like build pack API versions, we'll emit like a warning message that alerts people that something is going on that they might care about. Nothing is ever, and to do that, we use the info log level, and then we just append warning : at the beginning of it. It's pretty basic. So I think one of the goals that we have for the logging API, or one of the goals that I would like to see in terms of the logging API, is that as a build pack author, I can control the way that the output looks. Because right now, if libcnb logs something, it does not mesh with the rest of my output, so it stands out even more so than you want for a warning message. And so to do that, what I was thinking we could do is basically just add a logger interface that kind of specifies these methods, and the build and detect take a config object that you can create, and you can pass in these with, blah, blah, blah things. So basically just adding a with logger, and then you could pass in your implementation of that logger. So when you create your, when you call build or when you call detect, you would basically just be passing in the logger that you want it to use. And then through that, you could customize your own implementation of that logger that, makes things print in a way that you want. I think it gives more flexibility in terms of like what you want to do with debug output, if you, how you want that to work. At the same time, I think we need to provide a kind of basic implementation of this interface as well, so that you don't necessarily have to do that. And, that would kind of be the existing implementation, which I just renamed to plain logger because it doesn't do anything except write to the console. The questions that I have here is because the build pack only writes to debug right now. I'm curious if people think we really even need to have the like info and multiple levels. I think that the warnings are a special case, and that we probably want to do those a little bit different and not write them through the info level. That way, as a build pack author, I know when a warning is coming through, and I can make that prominent in a way that I want to. If that's use color or if that's bolded or whatever, I can control that better. So, one possibility would be to have, a set of methods, warn F, where, when I implement this logger, I just know, okay, this is a warning. So, all my warnings are going to be bold or something like that. Another possibility is that for error handling, we are using this exit handler. So if we didn't want to add the warn levels, what we could do is basically just make the interface for the logger like debug only. And then we could supply like a warning handler here. And that would simplify the logging interface quite a bit, make it easier to implement. And then you would just have a second interface, warning handler, to supply for your warnings. So I don't know what people think about that, if there's a strong preference or one way or another, or other ideas for how we might handle that, but that's kind of what I've been kicking around at the moment.
Can you give me an example of like the types of warnings that libcnb creates?
In V2, there's only one at the moment. Excuse me. You know what? So in the build, it's doing this right now. We had some additional warnings that were being output around source bomb, differences with the API versions, but those kind of dropped off because we were not supporting the older label-based SBOM or bomb format in V2. But I suspect that going forward, as we support multiple APIs, there will probably be, occasionally different warnings that we need to output.
I think what makes this feel like an interesting case to me is I think these warnings are very much directed at the build pack authors, right? And then sort of styling them and bolding them is like you want to see them so that as a build pack author, you can make different choices when you're developing your build pack, but I don't know if you actually want users to see them. It's like every time a user runs a build, you want them to see a big red warning that's like your build pack author did something weird here, right?
Then you get to complain upstream, I guess.
Yeah.
It's always been some of the problems with, I think, just build pack logging and messaging is that there are sometimes two audiences.
Yeah. And that's why I think what I really like is the idea of, for these warning messages, having some specific channel to the author that kind of indicates that context. Like Emily said, maybe you don't want to print that warning message to the screen, but maybe you want to handle it in a different way. Maybe you want to be really strict and you want warnings to be treated as errors, or something like that, so that you can catch them in development.
Yeah, I want to say maybe you want to just have it blow up so that you don't release a build pack that does this.
Yeah. But I feel like that's probably like an author decision. And that's why, like, I don't know, like maybe that warning handler could be something that is useful for that.
Well, like in this case, what is happening? Like literally, why is this a warning?
It's basically because there's a setting that's going to be ignored, and we don't want that to be silently ignored, because someone could expect that to do something and then it not do what they expect, and then have kind of a like long debugging session to try to track down why it's not doing what they expect.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of thing where maybe you want to just fail, right?
It's possible that could be another approach that we take, is like there are no warnings, they're just errors, and we could use the error handler we already have for that.
It's like if we're trying to warn build pack authors that they've done something wrong. But they're in control of the upgrade cycle here. Like maybe we just don't want to warn them. We just want to force them.
Yeah, my only concern with that would be in the like process of upgrading. If you haven't had a chance to get to something yet, I don't know if like you could get into a spot then where I'm stuck. I can't upgrade to the next libcnb until I upgrade my build pack API, because it's just going to fail. And maybe that's fair, but that would be a concern. Like if we're emitting warnings instead, you could still upgrade, possibly get other benefits, but just have to deal with some limitations.
Like right now, if you were doing this and you upgraded to libcnb v2, like without changing your build pack, you have two options. You could like upgrade your build pack API, or you could remove default is true because it doesn't make sense. But I feel like either way is like helping the person make a change rather than leaving something that isn't working, right?
Yeah, I don't really have a strong preference. I feel like making everything errors would be very clear, when you are doing an upgrade of your build pack API, like it's going to help you catch those cases where things have changed that you might not notice, which I don't think is a bad thing. It just might mean it might force build pack authors to deal with that at that time, as opposed to upgrading the API and dealing with it later.
I mean, we could default to error, right? But then they could always supply their own logger or something that if they really want to not make an error, they can deal with it that way.
I think if I'm understanding what Emily's proposing is we would just basically use exithandler.error in place here, which would effectively just not really give them an option to change that. I mean, you could potentially supply an exit handler that does nothing, but I think that's going to really screw up the build pack in general.
The other logging question I had was, I know in the past we did some sneaky logging through like a tunnel writer interface. Have we kept that or gotten rid of it in V2?
Mysterious Toml writer. I have not looked into that much. I'm not really sure what it does, to be honest.
I think it was a place. I was curious why we
Yeah.
had a TOML writer interface in this library when I first looked at it. And then when I dived into it, is because it's intercepting the TOML in order to log things, or it used to be. But maybe we've gotten rid of that and then we're fine. I think this is actually in libpack. It's like what libpack does is it puts in a different implementation of TOML writer so that it can log things in particular places. But I don't think this makes sense as an interface personally, or as a place where people want to inject things. But I guess
Let's
that's
see where
just a
this is
style
used.
question. That's not the most important thing if the weird behavior is not in this library itself.
I wonder too if this is partially used for mocking and testing. But I don't know. I'd have to look more. It seems to be used in quite a few places.
Yeah, it's just a ghost style nitpick. It's not the most important thing in the world. I thought that the behavior that I find more offensive, I thought was in libcmd, but it's really in libpack. So
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it for what I had in terms of logging. If yeah, if there's other thoughts about that folks have, feel free to let me know. I'm going to try to put some sort of PR together, and once that's out, then we can get some more feedback on that.
last thing on our agenda today is build pack configuration.
Yeah, I put this on there. Just been running some build packs internally for work, and some of the stuff just came up of like how you can manipulate and configure build packs. I think in kind of pre-CNB days, like M-bars were the way people did this. But then you get this proliferation of like a bunch of different environment variables potentially to kind of do this. And of course you can document it somewhere. And we do have the build plan now, where if you had like a build pack that was running with your other set of build packs, you could pass some configuration via the build plan through kind of provide requires metadata stuff potentially that you could read through the build pack plan entry and then kind of read that out. But that obviously requires you to have a build pack that would actually do that. So like you couldn't easily do this via like pack via like CLI arguments, or I guess in Project Toml you could write an inline build pack that would write that. No, you don't get to write detect, I guess, in inline, if I recall. So maybe you can.
So
But I'm wondering if I was talking with some people at Heroku/Salesforce, and we were talking about like potentially a way to expose configuration potentially that would bubble up into the registry that would be a little better documented, that will allow potentially other build pack / application users to actually configure things and kind of pass that in.
I will say that Paketo went on a journey of trying to figure out a way of configuring build packs, from using, our own configuration YAML files to trying to go through the build plan, like you said, and ultimately we arrived at we should just use environment variable solution. And this was after, lots of iterations and an incredible amount of time, like thinking and implementing and re-implementing and re-implementing. I'd be interested in hearing another potential solution on top of that, but like I would just say that it does sometimes just like a lot of times our users don't necessarily want anything more complicated because environment variables are easy to understand. And so just giving them environment variables is sometimes the easiest way to get to the end as well. So I'll just throw that out there in terms of the pitfalls of configuring build packs.
I would also add that, like to your point about documentation, we've arrived on a quasi consensus in Paketo in terms of like machine configure, like a machine friendly format for that configuration. So we have like a section in build pack toml that we add. I don't know if something like that, like a more standard version of something like that might help in that, then the registry could parse that, and include that information, for users.
We've talked about using that information too to like auto-generate reference docs, things like that. Right now, sort of our libraries use that to auto-generate like help text when the build pack is running, which is kind of like docs and logs combined in a way. I feel like there's always been a tension between users want to commit their config to the repo in a file, and users want to set environment variables so they don't have to commit their config to the repo in a file. We've ended up going with environment variables because with, Project Toml, it can kind of do both, where you can just set the environment variable, or you can, commit it in your Project Toml. I think we've abandoned totally doing anything more complicated with the build plan and users. We've been typically using the build plan as build pack to build pack, sanity checks and communication.
When you say abandon, what were you doing before?
Forest wrote a really cool build plan, build pack that basically just let users, it was a build pack that just let users have a hook into the build plan. So you can configure build packs like that. And I think it's a really cool idea, but until we have better documentation about the build plan, or until people can understand the build plan better, it's not something that most people felt was the right interface for them. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Forrest.
It was a combination of, until people had a better understanding of how the build plan worked. And also there's shortcomings with wanting to do configurations of the build plan, most notably that you can't do any configuration in detect when you're trying to use the build plan. So sometimes in detect, we need to check certain configuration to make sure that it's valid at sort of detect time. A great example of this would be like checking to see that my Go targets are actually valid Go targets in detect instead of wasting your time and going all the way to build. And you can't do that if you're trying to inject it in the build plan, because any configuration has to sort of come at the end of the build cycle, or detect, I guess.
And another issue is just with like data passing more generally, in that like if you have scenarios where you've got like build packs that appear later in a group that say maybe require a particular dependency, but then want to know configuration information that's provided by that dependency, you like can't see any of that because the build plan only hands you back things that you yourself provide. It's like, for example, if I wanted to discover something like what is the version of Node or something that's installed, we end up in a situation where you're like, instead of being able to read that through like some configuration that's provided, I end up seeing it. I have to like reverse engineer it by like asking Node on the file system, what version are you?
Does that mean we just are doing build plan wrong? Like not build pack authors, but
There's definitely maybe a desire to be able to see the full extent of what build plan was chosen, including those bits that were like required when like the build plan comes back to a build pack. There are certainly instances where we're doing like weird stuff in our build packs because we're trying to like figure out, we've got like duplicative groups. An example of this is like, say for PHP, you might want to use like Nginx or Apache HTTPD as the like web server. And so what we have is like a terminal build pack that like requires either one of them mutually exclusively in like different groups in our like meta build pack. And then when that like terminal build pack runs, it doesn't really know which one actually got chosen, like Nginx or HTTPD. We have to like kind of introspect on the environment to figure that out. Whereas like if the build plan just said like you required Nginx and like here's a build plan that tells you that like Nginx was actually chosen, that would make that code like considerably simpler.
You either have to introspect or you have to vastly increase the complexity of your build plan and like or things together in such a way where like given the provision that you match, you can determine which requirements you had. Either way, you have to do some strange intuiting.
I think the short answer is the build plan perfect? No, it's not perfect. I feel like everyone agrees it's complicated, and most of the time, like we can use it to do the things we want. It's powerful if awkward. But I think the reasons it's not perfect, well, I'd be happy to discuss other strategies here. Just to tie back to the original question, I don't feel like the fact that users don't want to interact with it directly is one of its fatal flaws. I'm okay keeping the build plan, away from users, end users, and leaving it as build pack to build pack, so that end users have fewer variables to think about.
I feel like my build pack author users also don't want to interact with it, to be fair. So, like I feel like it's only used when it feels like you have to use it. Versus like a feature that is supposed to help with inter build pack communication. But if it's not actually doing that, then what is it actually doing?
Well, we use it all over the place for that. So I guess there are definitely some cases where it gets hard, like the ones that Ryan and Forrest were talking about. But I'm curious about what sort of cases you're running into where it's not working well.
I would kind of say something similar in that, like I tend to try to use it as minimally as possible to get the job done. Typically, like, is something in the build plan or not? And I'm not sure that we really get into using it much more than that.
I can't remember who originally pointed this out to me. Maybe it was Ben Hale way back in the day, but like the way he described it, or the way whoever this person was described it, I think was that build plan is really good if you have a scenario where a build pack needs to pass information forward to another build pack, but it doesn't at all enable you to pass information backwards. And so environment variables canonically have been how that was like suggested to solve that problem of like, I have a build pack that appears early in an order, but needs to pass information back to a build pack that appears later in the order. So I don't know, there is this like data passing problem, but like build plan only seems to fulfill like one half of the communication and doesn't allow you to like pass information in the other direction.
I was about to say, I think it's the opposite direction you can pass things in, but I realize we might be using the forward and backwards metaphors in opposite ways.
Yeah, like depends on how you think of the dependency graph, right? So like it's like leaf nodes can pass information to their parents, like up the graph, but like not the other way around.
Build packs that execute later in the order can pass information via the build plan upstream to things earlier in the order, but you cannot pass information via the build pack. I mean, build plan down the
Yes.
order stream. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of it as more about a way to ensure you're getting a compatible set of build packs. Like, I feel like the unidirectional nature of that is sort of by design, although you could argue that it's not well designed, in order to limit build pack coupling, right? It's like if I run later, I can use the build plan to make sure that I have everything I need to run. But if you start passing stuff forward, then it's not really like a requirement that you're having. It's just a mess of interactions. That wasn't very articulate. I could work on the description there, but it feels like it makes sense on some level to me that if what I'm putting in the build plan is what I require from another build pack, that only as a later running build pack am I even in a position to require something, right? If I'm running earlier in the process, I don't require anything from the later build packs because I don't need to know they exist at all in order to run.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It has always been the least part of the liked for me of the build pack API that came into the kind of CNB design personally. And it's also the most complex thing to explain to people.
I share your instincts. Pursuant to our discussion in working group the other day, I wonder if the right steps here are, write some really thorough documentation about what we have now and the different situations and limitations and how you can use it and when you should use it and when you shouldn't. And then like once we feel like we have a shared understanding of how the system is working, then incorporate the feedback. I feel like it was, Aiden who said this yesterday. I feel like right now a lot of feedback we get is I don't understand the build plan well enough to use it. But if we could do enough education such that even though people don't love having to do the reading to understand it, if when they were done reading it, they understood it, and then they could complain about the design, that'd be a good place to move forward from.
Yeah, I guess partly in this like working group though, like just from this discussion, I feel like the build pack authors here do understand the build plan enough and still have complaints about it to some degree. So I don't know if documenting and improving their mental model of the build plan is really the problem here. It's definitely a problem for other sets of users for sure, but
yeah, I guess I'm curious about, like which of our critiques or things we'd like to fix or see changed overlap with the Heroku build pack author critiques, right? But I feel like we're not at the level of like getting that kind of feedback from the Heroku build pack authors. It's more at the moment, like I don't want to use the build plan because it's complicated. That's what I'm hearing.
I mean, I feel like the the kind of scenarios that at least the Paketo folks here have described have been similar kind of things that, you know, I think it's just like as you get further into writing a build pack and wanting to do more complex things, like you explore and figure out and then realize, well, the build plan ain't it. I got to figure out a different way to kind of pass information, even though how we market it is like, I feel like we talk about how like you can use this for inter build pack communication, but you know, like Ryan said, it really is one directional. And so it is in some ways like very niche what kind of information you can pass through. And so you basically have to figure out different ways to kind of propagate information. And I think like the node example is probably one of the prominent things that I think if you decompose your build packs going from mono to multiple build packs, like it's kind of frustrating that you either have to shove it in an environment variable and pass it down that way, or this other build pack down the line basically has to rerun that same piece of code to then get that information out, because you can't pass that information back down. Like even though I'm providing a thing, I can never provide information once I've done this thing that this other thing requires, right? It's like you said,
Put it in
it's
an
only
environment variable
done,
or something, but yeah.
You basically have to like invent some other mechanism to kind of carry that information through.
Is there maybe an argument to be made that there should be some mechanism whereby you can pass information between build packs during the build phase that is different than the build plan? What I'm saying, I guess, is like currently the way we do stuff, like if build pack A needs to pass configuration information or metadata to build pack B that's happening after A, we basically just set like a build environment variable.
Yeah.
Do we need a different mechanism than just doing that? I don't know.
I wonder if it's making this easier for people to digest is just a matter of publishing some of the patterns that we're using, so people don't have to think about how to reinvent those patterns every time, and just know like, all right, if I want to pass info, this is how I do it.
Yeah, I guess just even thinking about that the node version use case for me, it just, if I say I have a requirement on node, I know this thing will run, but like if I'm depending on it, it is not crazy to me to think that I want information from that build pack that I expect it to run, and I want it to be passed down. Instead, I now have to invent this yet different contract between me and this other build pack, right? Where we have said that there is this contract, but it can't actually pass any information through.
Yeah, especially in a situation where you're like using like an OR build plan. In that case, you're like, I really want to know which one of the paths that I requested actually was the one that got chosen.
No. I think it's a good discussion that we're not going to solve in -1 minutes, but
Yep. Sorry.
I feel like, you know, getting some of this on paper, like situations, like the different types of ways people want to provide information, so and then we can compare them against our different mechanisms, would help us be more concrete about exactly what areas are lacking. All right, everybody.